you, Tina, so much for joining SheLeads today. I am honored to have you as a guest, and I'm excited to get to know you and ask you more questions, so thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for including me.
Of course. So as a little introduction, Tina, you're a professor of the practice in the Department of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford. You're a faculty director in the Stanford Technology Ventures program, and you teach many courses in entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation in the MSc department, as well as the Stanford Design School, one of which I've had the honor of taking, and it's been one of my favorite classes at Stanford. I took it last quarter, called Inventing the Future. So very so happy to have you on this show. And what I understand, so you have a PhD in neuroscience from Stanford Medicine, and just like right off the bat, what got you into neuroscience? And then even from there, where did you have that shift into entrepreneurship and academics?
So honestly, if you had told me back when I was a student what I am doing now, I would have been completely surprised and totally delighted. But I would have had no idea how I was going to get from there to here. So it's been quite a journey. If you think about going from being a PhD in neuroscience to teaching entrepreneurship to engineers, there were a lot of pivots along the way. I could tell the story as if it made complete sense, or I could tell it as a random walk. And it's probably a little bit of both. I'm someone who is always keeping my eye out for different opportunities and very curious. And so I was always willing, when there was an interesting opportunity, to say, boy, let me explore that. And somewhat fearless going into places where I didn't quite know what I was doing and figuring out that, you know what, I could probably figure it out.
So were you always like that, or did you have some, like from a little kid, you were always curious and looking for things to kind of learn more about, or did someone teach you along the way, or what would you say?
So it's an interesting question. When I certainly was curious, and I grew up in a family where being curious and asking lots of questions was very much part of the DNA of our family. I think one of the pivotal moments was I was a freshman in college. What happened is I always thought that I would be a doctor. I'm sure that when I was in the womb, my parents were saying, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. So I always assumed I would go into medicine. And my freshman year in college, I was very disillusioned by the pre-med environment. And I thought, wow, I am not going to be pre-med if this is the way that people think of themselves in that pre-med track. And so I started doing research and just stumbled upon a neuroscience lab and fell in love. I mean, I just became so curious and excited and stimulated and motivated. And so by the time I finished undergrad school, I decided I really wanted to pursue that and get a PhD. But there was a pivotal moment even in between there, while I was in college, when a professor of mine, and I'm curious whether you've had this experience too, where a professor says or does one thing that unlocks your mind. We had an assignment in a neuroscience, my first neuroscience class I took, and our assignment was to design an experiment to figure out what a particular part of the brain did. And they said, listen, we don't know what this part of the brain does. What might you do? What experiments might you design to figure out what this part of the brain does? And so I had such fun writing this paper, designing all these experiments, figuring out what I would do. And when I got the paper back, my professor wrote on the top, Tina, you think like a scientist. And at that moment, I became a scientist. It changed my whole definition of myself. I'm curious, have you ever had, I'm going to turn this around to you. Have you ever had that experience where someone, a parent, a teacher, a mentor, says something that has lit a fuse?
I don't know if I've had something as concrete. I do know that I'm very similar to you in the sense that I did come into Stanford thinking I was pre-med, because I had doctors in my family. My dad is a doctor, and I was like, I'm going to be pre-med. I love the sciences. And then similar, I was like, wait, this isn't for me. There's something else. And I think for me, honestly, I just explored other classes, and when I even reading the course descriptions, I was like, this speaks to me. This is what I want to learn more about. But I don't think anyone concretely wrote you are a scientist or something like that. But that's really cool.
There's still time.
Yeah, there for sure is. Yeah. So then in your PhD program, what made you go into, or what made you think of entrepreneurship as a concept to explore further and bring it into academics?
So when I was finishing my PhD, it was 1985, way back before you were born. And it was a really, really bad economic time. I was watching my colleagues not get grants, not get tenure. I was actually getting married, I was engaged. And I thought, let me project into the future here. I'm going to have to do several postdocs, move all around. There's a lot of uncertainty around getting a job and where that would be. And then looking at raising money around doing research felt very uncertain. Yeah. And I thought, you know what, this path just doesn't seem right. I know I'm a pretty good scientist, but I don't think I'm the best in the world. So I really want to find a place where I can have a really big contribution using the skills I have. And I used to hang out with some friends of mine out in front of Fairchild building, which is where all the neuroscience labs were. And we'd sit out there and think about what are the other things we might do. And we felt like we were trying to escape because going outside of the sciences when you were doing a PhD was really not considered. It was not considered the right thing to do.
Right.
I'm sure that my advisor views me as a huge failure for not staying in academics. But I ended up exploring all different things and took a very circuitous path until finally I was looking through the job openings at Stanford and stumbled upon this opportunity to help Tom Byers build the Stanford Technology Ventures program. And that story in itself is pretty fun about how I ended up getting the job.
Do you want to share it?
Well, okay. What happened is I initially, and this is a really, really important lesson here in this Amazing. Little story. Okay. So I really only wanted to work at Stanford because I had a little kid. I really wanted to have flexibility in my schedule. I didn't want a long commute. I mean, there were a lot of reasons I wanted to be at Stanford. I wanted to be in an environment that had a real research focus. So I saw the job listing. I printed it out, entrepreneurship, education, engineering. Wow, this is so exciting.
Yeah.
And I read it, and then I crumpled it up and threw it in the garbage because the job was so junior. It was like an administrative assistant job. It was coming in, they called it assistant director, but essentially it was the pay scale, the level, the responsibilities were really very, very, very junior.
Okay.
And, I had a PhD, I'd started companies, I'd been in industry, I had a lot of other experience, and this just felt like it was just not a good match. It was just too junior.
Right.
The next day, I took it out of the garbage can and said, there's something in here. I flattened it out, ironed it out. And I sent a note to Tom Byers. And I said, I still have, I could pull it up, the cover letter I wrote and my resume. And he reached out to me. And I ended up getting an interview, then another interview, then another interview, then another interview. I had 11 interviews for this job, 11 interviews. With everybody you could imagine.
Yeah.
And they offered me the job. And I got in and started the job, and I decided to take it because essentially, even though it was so junior, my insight was this was an amazing place to be with an enormous opportunity, and I needed to just throw my hat in the ring. I had to do it.
Yeah.
And so the lesson is that you don't get a job, you get the keys to the building. Yeah. And this is really important. I came in, and within a year, I became a director. The next year, I became executive director. I set my intention, what would have to happen for me to become a real professor as opposed to it on the staff side. And it took 13 years, but eventually I became professor of the practice. Incredible. And it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a combination of realizing you don't get a job, you get the keys to the building, and setting a very clear intention about what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, because it's like you've taught us, it's kind of what we make of it. If we take advantage of that opportunity, then more doors open. If we make that effort to meet more people and everything, then that's a great story. I love it.
I think there's another piece of it, though, is if you just do the job that you've been hired to do, you've made it clear to everyone that that's the job you're designed to do. That's what your capabilities are and your intentions and your motivations are. Yeah. But the key is if you set your sights on something else, sure, I could do the job that I was initially given within a fraction of the time. So it's like, okay, fine, I'll get that job done. But there's this opportunity and this opportunity, this opportunity. Yeah. And I just kept saying, pick me, pick me, pick me. honestly, there are so many things that they let me do that I can't even believe they let me do it. I mean, the first creativity class I taught,
Yeah.
it was a class that Bob Sutton was teaching,
Love Bob.
and he didn't want to teach it anymore. It was a class called Creativity and Innovation.
Okay.
And in fact, I'm teaching that class this quarter.
Right.
But he didn't want to teach it. And he said, I don't want to teach it. I've taught it enough. I want to do something else. And I said, pick me. I'll teach a class. And like, why they let me, I don't know. But you know what? I have asked for so many things. Many times I get a no, Tina, that's not right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, sometimes they say yes. And I basically blew that into an entire part of my job. I've written now 3 books on the topic over the last 20 years.
I love, it's such a great story. I really love it. And it does teaches us so many lessons. And I think it's a great segue. So I actually talked to Julie Foudy last week, and one thing I asked, what's a piece of advice you can share? And she said, honestly, just be bold, take risks, and at the end of the day, you can fail, but you're taking risks. What's the worst that could happen? And I explained a bit what we learned in class about framing failure, and it's how we perceive it. So I'd love for you, because you obviously are such a risk taker when it comes to this, and you're willing to ask and see what happens, because who knows, another door opens and that could lead to something else, and now you're professor of the practice. So I'd love for you to expand a bit on failure and how it's what we perceive and how we make it, and then also talk a little bit about the failure resume that you've had us do in your class.
Right. So I think failure is a super interesting thing, because failure, a lot of it is in your mind, right? One of the things we did in class was I had everyone do their riskometer, sort of look at their risk profile, and then think about, what is the bottom made of when you fail? What is the bottom made of? Like, what's your mental model of what happens when you fail? And fascinating to see, some people say, oh my gosh, the bottom is made of concrete. I hit and go splat, or a black hole. I fall in, I can't get out. Or other people say it's like a trampoline. I hit bottom and I bounce back up. Or it's, a pool of water. I kind of dive in. Yeah, I'm underwater for a bit, but then I come back up. And what I've realized over the years is that we all have these really interesting mental models of what failure is, and that we can change that. And that this is, once you realize that this framing is something that's completely arbitrary, you realize it's really not so bad. And as you pointed out, it's really important to think about what's the worst that could happen. I mean, if I apply for a job and I don't get it, okay, I didn't get it. I often think about people who run for political office. I mean, that is an incredibly public failure when you don't win. But what happens? People are actually really proud of you for trying, and they've listened to your ideas, and you've probably had an impact. So I think that it's really important, as you say, to be willing to take some risks that get you out of your comfort zone. You're never going to accomplish anything big without doing that. So talking about the failure resume, this is a concept I heard from a colleague at another school many years ago, and I adopted it. It's a really interesting exercise to capture your biggest failures, personal, professional, academic, could be athletic, whatever categories you want. And think about what you learned from each one. Because if you don't actually mine your failures for insights, you're missing a huge opportunity. Think about, learning to ride a bicycle. Nobody rides a bike perfectly the first time. They fall off and fall off and fall off. And each time you learn something new about how you succeed until ultimately you're riding the bike. The same thing is true with everything we do as an adult. You can't expect to be doing something complicated and difficult, and maybe something no one has done before. The first time right. And so it's really, really important to give yourself permission to fail, to extract the insights, and then move on.
Yes, it's so true. I think this is such an important lesson, because throughout life, we're all going to encounter failures, but it's truly how we view it. If we view it as a learning opportunity, then I think that's the ultimate goal. And then each time you get better and better, and then I think that's great. So thank you for sharing that.
So one of the insights I had just even recently was we have a relatively new puppy. And for those people who have dogs, when you realize dogs, something happens and then they just shake it off. It's like, shake it off. And it's this amazing process in which they go through. They can have an interaction with another animal or something that happens. and they just shake it off and then it's done.
Yeah.
And I think if we could be better at shaking off those feelings when things aren't, things didn't work, okay, shake it off.
Yeah.
And move on to the next thing.
Exactly. We should learn from our dogs, definitely.
Exactly.
And then, so you talked a little bit about the risk wheel and how everyone has different risks. We take more risks when it's social risk versus political risks or anything like that. And I'm wondering, so would you say people who are naturally risk averse and they don't like taking risks, do you think that's something that can change? And if so, how? How do people become more comfortable taking risks?
Right. So you're describing the riskometer, which is essentially a little spider chart. Yeah. Think of a spider web, and where the inside is 0 and the outside is 10.
Yeah.
And then you map out on the different spokes of it different types of risks. So social risk, emotional risk, physical risk, financial risk, ethical risk, political risk, whatever type of risk you want. Yeah. And then you map out your risk profile. It's really fascinating to do this and compare it with your friends or family and to see actually how different you are in your risk profile. But it's super easy to start thinking about changing that. I mean, imagine that I had a fear of public speaking. And so my social risk profile was really low. Well, I could just do a little thing. Maybe I get up and give a toast at a family gathering. Oh, that wasn't so bad.
Right.
Maybe I then agree to give a talk within my own department. Maybe I, take on a role in a classroom project. Right. Each one of these gives you more and more confidence, and pretty soon your social risk is, your profile changes.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing could be true with anything. Maybe it's a financial risk. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm really uncomfortable making any investments, but maybe I'm like, okay, I'll make a little investment here.
I see.
Okay, that was interesting. Here's what I learned from that. Yeah. Oh, I've made a little different investment here. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll, so you can, in any of these, you can stretch yourself with experience.
And so, put yourself out there, put yourself in those positions where you feel uncomfortable.
And I'm going to guess, you're an athlete. I mean, I'm going to guess that you've had to, over time, you put yourself in positions where you have to take different risks regarding physical risks. Yeah. Is that true?
100%. Yeah.
Definitely. What's an example?
I think a lot of things, but for instance, we do fitness tests and it definitely puts us in an uncomfortable position, but it's something that you have to do, and you may not get the score that you want, but it's something that you learn from and you work towards. So I think there's a lot of different things, even in the weight room where you have to climb a rope or do pull-ups or whatever it is, but it's putting yourself in a place where you're like, okay, I haven't done this before. I got to take this risk.
Mm-hmm. So, exactly. And then push and say, okay, if I couldn't, climb that rope today, maybe next week I can do it. And let me push myself a little bit harder.
Yeah. And even also in sports, even the position you play, maybe you're going to be put in a different position for that game or something. So it definitely applies in so many different realms. Yeah. So kind of going back to your journey to becoming a professor of practice and just your whole journey towards where you are now, I'm wondering, in those 11 interviews, as a female, did you ever feel like, okay, I have to overcompensate or just prove myself even more for my male counterparts that are applying for the same role or anything in general, even in academia?
It's such an interesting question because that isn't my mental model of the way that I've engaged with the world. As being a scientist and being, I spent most of my time growing up, most of my friends were guys. Mm-hmm. I hung out with the guys. I was one of the guys. I was a scientist. So I never really saw myself as different.
Yeah.
Or that I had to overcome some prejudice. There is one place where I found that being a woman ended up being a disadvantage.
Okay.
And that's in my first real job after graduate school as a management consultant. Mm. And back in those days, it was very sexist. Mm. And the way that I was treated was very surprising to me. And it wasn't until later that I identified that I was treated this way significantly because I was one of the only women who was there. While in the situation, I just interpreted it I was very confused by why I was being treated differently by the other guys. And it wasn't until later that I started realizing that there was a lot of issues related to gender.
Interesting. And you haven't, I think that's honestly, because you mentioned like you don't have that mental model as if like where you are now and just getting to where you are now, you didn't have that model where I'm different than them and I deserve any less, anything.
Exactly. So it wasn't where my mind went.
Yeah.
It was only when I started seeing some of my other women colleagues having similar situations and similar experiences that I started saying, oh, there's a pattern here. But it wasn't where my mind went initially.
Interesting. So do you think that almost should be like every female should have this mental model? I think it's almost sometimes when it's out there so much, it's almost this way where like we're projecting it too. Do you think it, or do you think like everyone, like, do you think this is necessary in a way? I don't know. Does that make sense? Like, should we all have that mental model?
What I heard you saying is, should we all just assume we're being treated the same way until proven otherwise? And I think so. I think that sometimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
If you're in a situation where you think you're going to be treated differently, then you end up being treated differently because you behave in a way that sets you apart. And I've always found that if I engage with my colleagues in a way that we're all equal, that we all have similar opportunities, then that's much more likely to be the case.
Yeah, interesting. I think I tend to agree, but obviously I have a lot more experience to do. But I think that's a really interesting outlook to have. So, Tina, you've met a lot of incredible people, successful people, you yourself included. But I'm wondering, what are some top 3 qualities that you think every successful person that you've met has, including yourself, but just like top 3 qualities that you need to have?
Okay, well, I wasn't given this in advance, so I'm going to, this is sort of my gut reaction.
Okay.
One is curiosity. Okay. I think people who are successful are really curious. They learn something new every day. They're always asking questions. I mean, I think that's a key thing, is being really comfortable about asking questions and not being afraid if you don't understand something to ask a question. Right. So curiosity. Okay. The next thing is, I think actually having a lot of energy is an amazing trait. Now, obviously, some people just naturally have more energy than others, but those people who have a lot of energy are able to get a lot done, more done than people who don't. So that's something that I'm not sure how much control one has over that, but energy, curiosity, and the ability to focus. The ability to take something and some goal and say, I am going to focus that curiosity and that energy in a particular way and get to a particular goal is one of the hallmarks of people who are successful. Yeah. You can have curiosity and a lot of energy and dissipate it all over the place. Right. But if you can focus it, then amazing things happen.
Cool. I love it. That's great. I think those are 3 great ones. And then 2 questions that I ask all of the guests on SheLeads. So first one, what is a passion or hobby that you have that's completely unrelated to your work?
So that has changed so much over time because I am constantly shifting things I do. One of my recent hobbies is doing art, making collages out of New Yorker covers. If you looked around my office, you would see hundreds of pieces that I've made.
I love that.
Some of them are tiny. I can show you some little tiny ones. Some of them are really big. Like I do this. Let's see if this is going to show up. So this one is an interesting one. This is all, it fell apart.
Well, that's so cool.
Right? But some of them are really, let's see. Can you see this?
Yes. Oh my God. That's amazing.
These all sorts of, collages out of New Yorker colors.
I love it.
And I make little ones too out of different images.
Have you ever, so that reminds me, have you ever, do you do vision boards, or have you ever done a vision board?
What's a vision board?
So a vision board, it reminds me because a vision board is almost where you put in a notebook or anything, a paper, a poster, where kind of what you see in 5-10 years for yourself, like a vision, what you see, what you want to happen and what you manifest. And so I've done it actually with my mom and sister, and we cut out things from magazines, like words or phrases, and then we put them all together, and it's awesome. It's really great. It's a fun activity.
You know what's interesting? I have a slightly different way of engaging with the world. Is less about like what I want to do in 5 years, although that was the big intention of like I want to see what can I do to advance my career.
Yeah.
But I often get sparks of excitement about something, and then I just do it. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm really excited about. I did a project called 60 Weeks to 60.
Okay.
And then the 60 weeks up until my 60th birthday, every week I gave myself a different challenge.
Oh, so good.
That's how the collages came about. One day I was sitting there on a stack of New Yorkers next to me on my nightstand, and I just said, oh, I took 3 of the covers, cut them all up, put them together, and thought, oh my God, that is so cool.
Yeah.
And that ended up launching a whole, huge number
Very
of things
cool.
that I did. Sometimes it'll be, oh gosh, I'm really interested in this topic, and I will just write a table of contents as if I was going to write a book.
Oh,
It might not turn. I have so many table of contents.
Oh my
Every
God.
once in a while, it turns into a whole book, and I go, great, I'm going to write that book. But I really respond to things very quickly, and I get a spark of excitement and curiosity, and then I sort of take it to its natural conclusion.
Yeah, I love that. That's almost how SheLeads started. I kind of got this spark, and I was like, you know what, I'm doing it. And then I just
Exactly. I mean, I've written 2 books on the chemistry of cooking. So those are my first 2 books that I wrote. And how did the first one come about? I was sitting in my kitchen, and I said, God, and I was in grad school, and I said, gee, I understand in great depth what's happening in my kitchen, but I mean in my lab, but not in my kitchen. I made a list of all the questions I didn't understand, all the things I didn't understand about what was happening. And I tried to find the answer. I couldn't. I said, I'm going to write that book. And so I just started doing research and started writing that book.
Wow, that's amazing. And one of your top books that I've loved is What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20. So I would definitely recommend that to anyone, especially my age, because it's definitely a great book and very.
And that book, do you know the story about how that book came about?
No, I don't.
So that book came about because my son was at the time 16.
Okay.
And I started thinking, oh my gosh, he's going to go out to college in a couple of years. And there are all these things I want to teach him that I haven't taught him. Yes, he's, pretty good in school, but, these are all these life lessons. So I literally just had a Word document on my computer with all the things I wanted him to know. And then I got asked to give a talk. And I said, oh, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to take this list I put together for my kid and created a talk called What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20. And then, that ended up leading to more talks and more talks. And then I was flying home from one of the talks. I said, you know what? Maybe this is a book. So I just sort of started jotting things down on the airplane. Anyway, the point is, it's about starting.
Yeah.
It's about not doing something little, like what's the first next step, like taking the 3 New Yorker covers and cutting them up and putting them together and saying, oh, that's interesting, and then it sort of expands into a whole set of other things.
It's so true, because I think that's like a big challenge that people have. It's like, how do I start? And you just have to find like the incremental steps. And I think
tiny steps. Do something little. Do something little. Like, you say you're going to, you want to have a podcast. It's like, okay, I'm going to call someone up and see if they'll talk to me.
Exactly.
And guess what? People said yes.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, great. Exactly. Now you've got a podcast.
Yeah. There we go. We'll see. But no, it's so true. And then, okay, so last fun question is, what is a weird, fun talent that you have that no one else really knows about? And I'll give you mine. So what I've been doing for my guests is I can throw blueberries and grapes into my mouth usually at a distance, but it's a little tricky over here, but I'm going to do it for you. We'll see how it goes. Okay. So here's the blueberry.
Okay, let's see if it works.
Okay.
Do you do this every time?
I do this every time. Sometimes I fail once or twice, and then I get it, but it's all right. Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, you are so good. Gosh, I wish I had that talent. I think my son can do that too.
Yeah.
I think
it's fun. It's fun with a partner. I can have someone throw it to me.
Throw it and have someone. Yeah, exactly.
That's
okay.
Fun.
Something to work on. Maybe I'll try tonight.
Okay, good.
Gosh, what is my weird talent? I guess one of my superpowers is that I can throw together a dinner party in like 5 seconds. If you were to say, let's have a dinner party, I would have absolutely no qualms, no problem. Wow. I would just say, great, come on over. And I would put together a whole meal with whatever was in the kitchen.
Oh my goodness. For any amount of people or?
Yeah, sure. Show on it. Come on over.
Wow. That's very cool.
Next, we're allowed.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that count as a superpower?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's pretty special. Yeah.
Okay. Kind of a surprise, thing. Yeah. I'm totally very comfortable with everyone showing up, and we'll make it happen. We'll make it work.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, Tina, I can honestly talk to you for so many more hours about everything, and it's been so much fun, and I've learned a lot. So thank you so much for being a guest, and I've absolutely loved it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Of course.